let me preface these remarks with I never, ever believe Israeli figures. I've been in the government too long to know that the Israelis are patent liars in their intelligence community, in their propaganda community, certainly, and in their leadership. They are inveterate liars.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours.
Saturday, May 25th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. Today, unfortunately, we have limited time, so I'm going to get right to it today. Obviously, the title, what we're going to be talking about, the interesting follow-up of the ICJ and their part of this conversation, the World Court and the International Criminal Court, the ICC, one of which is ordering Israel ICJ to stop its halt on Rafah. The ICC is the site of this that's putting out at least saying they're going to be filing and submitting warrants for the arrest of Netanyahu, Gallant, and 3 members of the leadership of Hamas, which I certainly, as I've talked about before, believe quite strongly that they're being kept safe in Qatar, and we can prove the funding of Hamas from Israel. So it's an interesting overlap. Today, we're going to talk about the order and how clear it is that both the United States and Israel are just disregarding everything that they've previously told us we're supposed to be bound by, or we're supposed to be acknowledging, or, like, look at it this way, to one quick point to start. Stepping into the conversation of the globalist mindset, the, Great Reset, the New World Order, these things that have been put forward that, funny enough, 30 seconds ago were conspiracy theory. These are the mechanisms through which they would have argued this would be controlled. And now suddenly, because it goes against them, it's completely anti-Semitic and it's a fake court and we shouldn't be listening. And, and look, my opinion is somewhere in the middle of all this, because I equally see the concern of these globalist entities dictating what individual sovereign countries can do. But it's an interesting and important discussion to have, to see how dishonest, at the very least, both these entities are, as these are the same groups that they, as I've said many times, have historically told us to look to in times like this. We're also going to talk about a few other things that I'm going to leave off just in case we don't have time to get to, but a lot of important stuff that we should continue to cover. Oh, so, okay, of course, I don't know. I'm not sure what's going on with the StreamYard right with the black screen. Apparently, you guys are seeing. I'm not going to worry about it right now. For some reason, last time my video just came in. I can see it on my end. We'll leave it alone for that for now, but as long as you can hear me, we're going to get right into it. So let's start off with an interesting point. I just wanted to highlight this again. Every day now, this happens to me. Every single day I get this. This is just a screenshot of all of everything on Twitter, almost interestingly, right before my show, every time now, crashes. And they all reload. And of course, anything I had saved or highlighted, goes away. But I just don't, I'm not really even trying to make a point about this today. I just want to know, does anybody else dealing with this same issue? Is anybody else out there having only Twitter crash on their browser? And it's not even necessarily when I have a lot of stuff open. I've had it happen before when I've only got 4 or 5 tabs up on the browser and only Twitter crashes. Just find that very strange. And I personally think it's about selectively throttling or downgrading or bit rating or whatever we talk about from this for certain people under certain topics. So you guys let me know. I'm curious about that. Another important thing that I saw, which I want to make sure you guys saw from the New York Times and just in general, they're reporting countries fail to agree on treaty to prepare the world for the next pandemic, which, of course, I shared with a little celebration emoji. Now, this is important to see for 2 reasons. It shows you that I think that this is struggling because of the world's, not the governments, but the individual peoples of the world and their pushback to something like this. Another angle of the globalist effort. Now, what's important, I think this is similarly what we're seeing with Israel and a lot of other topics. It's not because they don't want this. Clearly, the governments were lockstep, but it's about the fact that some of them are seeing the loss they might take by not recognizing the overwhelming disagreement from their own people. And now with shifting dynamics long before just right now on October 7th forward, I think in some cases they're choosing to kind of at least play the middle ground. like we see with Israel. I don't believe a lot of these people truly care about the civilian lives. I think they recognize that they'll lose more by maintaining what used to be the only thing they needed to do, which is supporting Israel. And now they're seeing a downside to that more than ever before, if not in more than the gain. And so you can see they're opportunists. Now, that's what I think is happening here. Either way, it's not going to stop. Let's make sure we first and foremost recognize that this is going to continue as they always do. These agendas will swing around, and it may not be a month from now, a year from now, it could be 10 years from now. But recognize that this will not go away, and we need to continue to fight it. This is the yin and yang battle of good and evil forever, in my opinion. But I think this is a positive thing. Now, it's not to say that from some objective standpoint in a different world where we weren't dealing with these kind of complete criminal organizations running our world, our governments, then maybe you could argue that we should have some kind of an agreement amongst country. It's a whole other conversation. I'm not even necessarily saying I agree with that, but I'm just simply opening up the point to show you that it's not just the idea, it's the way that it's being done and the people behind it and the very clear criminal record of all the ones pushing this and what they're going to use within it to abuse you and take away your liberties. Another interesting point I wanted to highlight to start, I just think this is hilarious. I don't even know why this is coming out now. Cannabis overdoses rise among older adults. Now, I take the time to read it. It's interesting. But what I think the obvious point is, and this is the study they're highlighting, edible cannabis legalization and cannabis poisonings in older adults. Can you guess what the one central point that I'm going to highlight in this is that you can look up very quickly in the study? Nobody died. So what are we really talking about? It's not poisoning. It's what the reality is. These are people that are taking too many edibles and in some cases just having a panic attack or feeling overwhelmed by what they feel and rushing to the hospital thinking something's going wrong. Now, you could argue that could, because of other things they're dealing with, lead to some kind of a problem. But interestingly, it rarely, if ever, does. That's the joke I think Willie Nelson's attributed with, saying that the only way you'll die from cannabis is if a pound of it falls in your head. And this is it's almost impossible to find a death associated with cannabis that is not clearly, when looking into the real medical breakdown, because they got in a car crash because they were also drunk while they had some cannabis in there. Like that kind of stuff is the way that they manipulate this. Or Ben Swan did a great breakdown in regard to kratom. Same idea, where they were so afraid that I think it's because it very clearly was something being used to circumvent all sorts of medications and very positively, even though there's downsides to it, like everything. That Ben Swan highlighted that the government, I think it was the FDA, highlighted a death to kratom that was literally a gunshot wound to the chest, and he had kratom in his system. That's not a joke. That's how dumb this gets. Now, in any case, nobody died in all of these. Now, you could argue that they, I guess, got poisoned, but what was the fallout? Read it for yourself. They're fine. They took it. They went to go to hospital because they were worried about it. And I've dealt with this in my own life, where I know somebody who accidentally took too much of an edible without realizing it and thought they were having a heart attack. And the point is that is something you can feel because you don't know what's going on. But is it really there? No. Did he have a heart attack? No. That's what's crazy about this. And so nonetheless, it's being used to scare people about something that I argue is wildly beneficial in 1,000 different ways, especially for people with ailments. But in any case, welcome to the corrupt world that we live in. I'll include some of these articles I recently wrote in case you want to understand my full perspective on cannabis and why it's lied about in every possible way. The cannabis deception, how your government stole your future, or this one I always highlight, top 10 marijuana myths that no one should believe, with a lot of citations to every single claim, and then individual shows for each claim that you can watch additionally to that. Now, on top of that, I wanted to highlight quickly that I changed the podcast the podcast player on my website. So for those of you that are usually engaging with the podcast, let me know if you like it better. I frankly think it's a lot better, as well as the fact that there's now a transcript on here. Where was it again? I'm kind of hurrying, so I'm not there. There is a transcript on here you can read, and also look at the breakdown of the transcript from the actual show. So there's a lot of extra stuff we're adding here, and a very important article that Derek just put out. It's in continuing the conversation of the fluoride lawsuit, the fluoride trial. This is simply just yet another study that finds association between water fluoridation and brain health, specifically in regard to pregnancy and the overlap therein. And it's just incredible to see how obvious this is. And they all know this. And now it's getting to the point to where the studies are showing just moderate levels are clearly associated with negative effects, behavioral problems in children, which then they give them more medications for. So it all works out for Big Pharma, doesn't it? It's one of the most obvious things happening, and it's ubiquitous. And I argue there's a hell of a lot more that they could think about. The lawsuits that would come if this actually got admitted to. It's in all of your water. They force it in all of your water. This is a big deal, and that's why they're so terrified for this to come out. But guess what? It's already out. The NTP report that we've already highlighted that they've stopped from being made officially public, even though it was leaked, is damning as hell. It shows that they knew that, and now they're fighting to keep this dangerous thing in your water. That's your government. Now, another important article that Robert put out, we put this up 2 days ago, the bad faith betrayals of Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. Now, this is an important article. Not this, and this is what I love about Robert's work. Obviously, this is why he writes for us, is because he's very objective, especially, I mean, bottom line is, you read this, he's not trying to make this person out to be some single, a hero. And some people may believe that, but he's simply highlighting that he is not what they say he is. Sort of like Soleimani, exactly like that. And it's just absurd that we go through this political cycle, this propagandized cycle where they, it's sort of like in a reverse way how you have American politicians who are absolute monsters who pass away and they spend a month trying to turn him into some kind of hero angel. It's just, this is the game. Most of these people have been involved with things that you could highlight that are bad. Now, but one of the things they use to call him the butcher of Tehran is a complete it's a complete misrepresentation of what ultimately happened. And even then, the data is not truly there the way they claim it is. And overall, he's simply just not the person they're making him out to be. And in general, the idea about Iran and what they claim needs to be happening, I think is very important to the conversation right now. And you should read this because he seems to have been the next in line to be the supreme leader. And I think if you understand the reality around all of this, which I think clearly we're talking weaponized electronic warfare, we're talking about potential weather manipulation. These are very real things we should not disregard. And if you were to believe he was taken out, think about the timing of all of this. At a time when the other person is about to be stepping aside, he seems to be next in line. Now there's an opening. Now, all of a sudden, I'm willing to bet you we're going to see a push over the next so many months to a year that they're going to be highlighting the person that they think should be stepping in. And what do you know? It happens to be a person from the party that they started all this time ago, a person that they support. You know where this goes, guys. It's the same old thing they've always done. It's in the interest of them at the expense of the Iranian people. And it's frustrating to see this continue to happen. But I think it's important to understand that this is always the opposite direction of what they claim they're fighting for. And look at their track record. And on top, to make that point, Dan Cohen, interestingly enough, returned from a trip from Iran. And he just happened to coincide with what happened with the president. And the interesting point is, he says the pundits and media say that he had no support from the masses and were happy about his death. Well, guess what? It's shockingly the opposite. It's just, it's embarrassing. And this is a good starting point for the rest of the conversation about Israeli propaganda. It's amazing that they have the nerve or the desperation to put out things that are so easy to prove are lies, mistranslations, or just flat out lies about people who are still alive that they claim they killed. It's crazy. So here's another example of that. So just make sure you're not listening to people who have never been to Iran, who are simply experts on the propaganda spun by these governments. And maybe they don't even know that. They think they're experts on Iran when what they're experts on is, well, the lies they've put together around those stories. Just at least question it is all I hope. Now, one more point in regard to censorship I think is important. I just think it's incredible how much TLAV The Last American Vagabond has been censored and suppressed across, as far as I can tell, more platforms than anybody I've ever seen. Now, I could be wrong about that. I never used to really claim that, but I'm at a point now where I'm like, it's exacerbating. Incredible how many random things. Well, we can add Twitch to that list. Twitch, a gaming platform that I use just because why not, right? But nonetheless, you can add them to the long list of censored platforms that have censored TLAV with no warning or justification, which obviously violates their own terms of service. I do not know anyone else censored from this many platforms other than The Last American Vagabond. It is an objective, nonpartisan coverage or work or podcast or show that truly scares them, in my opinion. I really believe that. Now, what you can just see that I just tried to log in because it was disconnected from my streaming thing, and your account suspended. What do you know? Surprise, surprise. And by the way, and I wasn't going to get into this, but I just want to note this because I think it's coming. I don't want to jump the gun, but I believe we're about to get censored on Stripe, of all things, which it wasn't surprising to me, but because we've been using it as one of our donation portals, and all of a sudden, guess what? They just updated their terms of service in April last month. And now they want all these new things, and it looks like I might be violating X, Y, and Z. Well, we'll see what happens. Nothing new for TLAV. We'll find another way for you guys to donate. Like, think about how impossible it is in a country we're supposed to be freely engaged, free speech, free flow of information, and yet they're in every possible way stopping you from supporting what you want to support. And we're objective, nonpartisan, fact-based coverage. Look at our track record. It's incredible. And right now they're trying to make this whole push to say that we're breaking the law by simply covering what the entire world seems to be highlighting. Now, let's start with one more point about censorship that brings us into the conversation of Israel. Gen X girl just posted something that got deleted by Twitter. And she said she called them out after this. And here's the actual link that you can see. It's gone. By the way, this will be interesting. Remember that the post is unavailable. The point we're going to make in a second about Israel and the coverage we just had, which you guys remembered, I'll make sense of this in a second for those that didn't see it. It turns out that tweet wasn't deleted. At least it's there now. And it's interesting to me. And I'll come back to that because this is what we were seeing. And now because all my tabs refreshed, I've lost that one as well that showed that, but I have a screenshot of it. I think this is a game being played by Twitter where they can hide things if it's not censored, or they can put it. It's social engineering, guys. It's very obvious to me. But anyway, she posted this video, and I'll play it for you. But she said, why did X delete this post without even notifying her? This is a video of President Truman in historical presidential record. It's very real. It's not against terms of service. Why was it deleted? Well, let me show you why it was deleted.
Zionists, particularly, who were against anything that was to be done if they couldn't have the whole of Palestine and everything handed to them on a silver plate so they wouldn't have to do anything. It couldn't be done. We had to take it in small doses. You can't move 5 or 6 million people out of a country and fill it up with 5 or 6 million more and expect both sets of them to be pleased. We had all sorts of objections to everything that was done. Something had to be done. We went ahead and done it, and had it done, and now it's working out. Eventually, I think we'll have them all satisfied. But it's going to take a great deal of time yet to get the job done. To recognize Israel is an easy one. I had to make a compromise with the Arabs and divide Palestine. The Jews wanted to chase all the Arabs into the Tigris and Euphrates River, and the Arabs wanted to chase all the Jews into the Red Sea, and what I was trying to do was to find a homeland for the Jews and still be just with the Arabs. But when you go into a thing of that kind, the people you help most are the ones that get most angry with you. Both of them were against me on the situation, but as President of the United States, I paid no attention to them, carried out what I thought was right, and I had the support of the Congress, and I could do it, which is unusual in these days.
Could you tell us specifically that a lot of Jewish people were against you, too?
Oh, well, there were a lot of Jewish people against me because they wanted the whole of Palestine. As I say, they wanted to drive all the Arabs into the Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
It's an object. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you believe what he's saying, or at the end of the day is that it shows you foundational lies that are still being spun today. Palestine, the original location, what was actually desired. I mean, it's very, very clear. Regardless of your thought about it, Twitter decided to delete that for no reason, except we know why. I think it's very obvious what's driving their policies right now, at least in some cases. And I had this on the way back machine just in case, or archive in case they delete that one too. Now let's talk about the one I was just mentioning. We just put this show out 2 days ago. Western, and again, I'm going to highlight the fact that we seem to be, with a lot of these discussions, really covering these things the day they're happening, as you see these trickle through both independent and mainstream media days later, demonstrating our value for why it's important, and largely, I think, why most platforms like ours, objective, nonpartisan platforms, get pushed to the side, because it's not inside of some paradigm that can be manipulated. As usual, jumping on this right in the beginning, breaking it down immediately. Western nations moved to recognize Palestine, and that was we'll also point that out in a minute, the additional points from that: Ireland, Norway, Spain. Also, Israel caught lying about viral video of IDF detainees. Oh, here's the CC, by the way. There's the closed captioning. You can see the transcript. So this was simply a good breakdown showing that these were all IDF members, verifiably so. And I even showed to you how the Times of Israel, using the archive, had edited out all the examples that they were military, that they were taken from the base. I mean, it's such wholesale dishonesty right from the core. It's incredible. On top of the fact that they lied about the translation in multiple places. And yet this trickled the entire Western media, just like many other examples that have happened so far from Israel. I mean, this is exposing their entire control. I mean, and not just Israel. Like, this is breaking down century-old manipulations, in my opinion, if not very least decades old. I mean, this is crazy to me how clear this is breaking things that they've been building. And it's good. It's a positive thing that's happening. But I just continue to ask why so many, other than the desperate Israeli nation or the government that is clearly doing it for an obvious reason, why the rest of these politicians would willfully destroy what they were building to manipulate us just to defend Israel, unless there was something much larger going on behind it. Watch the show. I just think that's such an obvious point to make. Now, we talked about this in the last show. Now, here was the lie, and I'll include both our show and Robert's excellent breakdown, showing you the Arabic, showing you how clearly they were lying. And guys, I'll show you, this has gone everywhere at this point. There's plenty of them, as usual, outlets and different individuals who are maintaining their lie about this, even trying to produce new lies to cover this lie. But anybody with integrity has already proven, yes, this was obviously mistranslation. But here's what's interesting. This is their post right here. Now, you saw this on the show. I went over this, and this is what it was showing. The post is unavailable. I clicked the link, and it said it wasn't there. I showed you this on the show last time. And yet now, actually what happened was I was editing Robert's article, and I said, hold on, how is that still there? I thought that was deleted. So just to be clear, this was not, some kind of mistake. You guys saw this when I went over it. This was clearly not there. But it could have just been that it was hiding it for some reason. But I just want to make that clear. So for those that are watching that show, I'm covering that it was deleted. Now, either way, I think it's actually even more crazy that they left it up. That's a lie. That's a provable lie, what they're claiming they said. I mean, even as Robert points out, it says here, these are the girls who can get pregnant. In the actual translation, you can see that they don't even, in the actual translation, they don't even say that. In the translation, it shows it in parentheses. You see right there. So even that is a lie on top of a lie. But if you actually go through this in depth, like we did, and here's even Giannis Tarawi, who you should be following, by the way, doing amazing work highlighting all the crimes they continue to post on their own platforms. It's incredible. Now, here was Robert's video, or a breakdown of the whole thing. He wrote written article. Israel's newest mistranslated, and it is the newest version. They've done this many times. Mistranslated Hamas hostage video debunked. Now he goes through this with what's the expression? Tooth and comb and what's the expression? Tooth and nail? I forget. Anyway, the point is very, very excellently breaks this down, explains it all, is easy to understand. It shows you how obvious this was. There's no way this was an accident. Now, thank you to the Squirrel for highlighting this. These are old articles. This is from February 8th, 2024. Actually, this is the older one. This is from November 8th, 2023. These are Reuters fact checks. Fact check. Video of a captured woman mistranslates captor as threatening rape. You'd be mistaken for assuming this is the current discussion. It's not. They've already been caught for doing this. Already been caught for pretending they said something they did not about rape. Oops. You think the rest of the corporate media doing their due diligence would find that? Or screaming about mis and disinformation all the time might care to make sure? No, of course not. Here's the other one. February 8th. Different discussion, not even the one from today or the last couple of days. Video mistranslated to claim Hamas says hostage will be sex slave. Again, they got caught lying. I mean, you can look at them for yourself. The verdict, false. Same with this one. Verdict, misleading. The subtitles and translation of the Arabic audio. No individual in the video says the woman should be raped. They're lying, guys, over and over and over. And yet there's some kind of central thing that keeps this moving forward. Here's a Squirrel breaking this down. Thank you. He's doing excellent work. Now, Solomon Ahmed points out something that I think is really important to take in. Now, remember, these are all IDF soldiers. It's verifiable without question. Even the Times of Israel posted all of that information, but then deleted it. But we've got the Wayback Machine. You can watch the last show we did. But here's how he highlights media bias. An actual 19-year-old IDF soldier, who, by the way, was involved with the surveillance station at the, Nal Oz base, which is responsible for some of the biggest massacres took place in the right of return march. Not to say individually those people, but you understand, if in a war, these are military targets. Even more so, when an illegal occupation and the right of armed resistance, they become legal targets in regard to even taking them as POWs or in any war context. They keep screaming about how they're innocent women, and that's because they want to spread this narrative. Of course, it gets reported as innocent girl taken hostage. Well, it's not a hostage when you're a military personnel. It's a POW or a detainee. But here, remember how this got reported? This is just don't want to say her name wrong. Hind Rejab. That's who that is. 3-year-old Palestinian girl who was killed in a car waiting for the Red Crescent because her parents had been killed just before that, crying on the phone saying, please come get me. And then before they got there, Israel bombed and killed her. I guess they must have thought she herself was a Hamas member holding somebody herself hostage, apparently. But guess how they reported that? Now, by the way, this is not an exact report. It's frustratingly enough, there's a lot of people who have shared that as if that's what the media said because it's in quotes. But this is how we have to be careful about this stuff, guys. Now, this person is just sharing the meme that was going around, not indicating that this was real, but somebody put that in quotes. And we just have to be better than that, guys. We have to realize that that's not exactly what was said. That's more of a combination of two things. It basically found its way into the van, which is kind of the way it was reported, as if it wasn't a deliberate act. And then the of a young lady was when that woman was on that news channel and she called it a young lady instead of a child. They're both generally real statements that were made, but it's important that we're accurate because somebody else with good intentions have framed this, a la Twitter files, as that's what the media said. Can you believe it? I can't believe they would say it that way. We got to be better than that. Be careful. Check everything, including people that don't realize they're, doing that on accident, whatever. The point is that is a young girl who was killed. And this, the way it gets covered versus this IDF soldier who's kidnapped while deployed in a genocide. I mean, it's insulting. 6-year-old Gaza girl was found dead days after pleading for rescue from Israeli fire. And then here's the BBC version of it. Easy to recognize. Now, in regard to the 3 countries, more to come, that came out and recognized or said they will recognize Palestine as a state. Of course, we just talked about this, how I get in a very weird and grotesque way, they've, I guess, used some kind of ambassador mechanism to call Ireland, Norway, and Spain and force them to watch that snuff film they put together. And by the way, they're showing them the video that we have proven, and they probably knew going into this, was lied about. Mistranslated, all of it. And that's one of the things they were shown. Now here, Sadia Saeed points out Hamas responded to that video with their own arguments. Now, in the interest of time, you can watch it for yourself. I'll just read to you what they're saying. They're showing you the breakdown here and saying Hamas explained all the things that we already know, by the way. Now, no, we're not just taking what Hamas said at face value because that would be dumb. You shouldn't take anybody's anywhere at face value. You should do your due diligence. Point is, before they even put this out, we already proved what they're saying. They explained that they were captured at the military base. And they say they were on break. That's why they were in civilian clothes. One of the other arguments was the day that they were on. It was either too early, they were in bed, or, either way, it was verifiably from the base. So you can decide for what your own reasons are for why they weren't in uniform. I think it was because it was early. In any case, the English translation was manipulated, as we all can prove at this point. Fabricated words were spoken by the fighters, and the footage shows no physical assault, only dialogue. Of course, your Twitter's freezing on me now. The moment, and then they go on to show you all the time they've proven by releasing people who were smiling, shaking hands, and showing them that they were not harmed, in good health, not starved, and then, saying after, to this very day, almost all of them, save for a few, that they were still treated kindly, that they were given food, that they were given medical attention, unlike what you would see in any circumstance with Israeli detainees, or hostages, if you will. Because that's what they are, seeing as how ongoing this has been happening for a long time, well before there was any declaration of war. The point is that this contradicts everything. Now, you could argue that without that, outside of that video, they're raping and torturing and doing everything. But of course, without evidence, that's just your opinion. Certainly could be. I wouldn't dismiss the possibility. But think about how ridiculous. And then they show the AP we just covered, the takeaway from the AP examination of how 2 different debunked accounts of sexual violence originated. And it's not just 2 of them, guys. They've been caught lying about damn near everything they put out. Now, here's a good video from Propaganda & Co., simply just quickly breaking down the reality of this in case you haven't watched those shows, but I highly recommend you watch ours or somebody else's to understand the full breadth of how much of a lie this was.
Have to see how Zionists use propaganda to distract. Just hours after Norway, Ireland, and Spain announced that they would recognize Palestine, Zionist influencers, media, and state institutions began tweeting out a video with a fake translation in order to spread atrocity propaganda lies. In this video from October 7th, you see resistance fighters capturing female IDF soldiers. These IDF soldiers engaged in a firefight and lost during the battle for their base. After being captured, the fighters tied them up and took them back to Gaza as prisoners of war. The Zionists deliberately mistranslated the video, however. Palestinians refer to the women as Sabiya, meaning young girl or teenager, but the Zionists mistranslated it to another similar sounding word, Sabiya, meaning sex slave. They littered the entire timeline with these posts to completely
One point I want to include real quickly, make sure you read Robert's article, because he really does a great breakdown of why the Islamic link in regard to why that word would be used. There's no way that this makes sense. Now, of course, anything is possible. Or that the idea that they would disregard their beliefs. I mean, that's possible as well in any circumstance. But when you really understand the full context, it obviously does not add up. And then, of course, you can prove that they lied about the word pregnant and plenty of other aspects of it. So if you can prove they lied about other aspects, that word itself should obviously be up for dispute. And I think that's very clear and provable, in my opinion.
Drown out the talk about Norway, Spain, and Ireland recognizing Palestine. And that's how Zionists use propaganda.
And that's always how this works, too. And every time, and this is my point about reactive propaganda. We keep seeing this. Or the last time they killed the first international UN member that was not associated with UNRWA, that was there from another country. And all of a sudden, they push into some screaming argument about how, look at all the UNRWA members, Hamas using guns to steal this or working with UN. And really, they were police members of Palestine who were helping work with UNRWA, which is what they've always done. Yet that still drowned out the whole discussion, and people didn't want to say what happened. And every time that goes on.
Distract. Another interesting aspect of the propaganda is that the Israelis literally debunked one of their previous lies with another lie. Let me explain. For months, Israelis showed this clip of a woman being captured and put into the back of a vehicle. They note the blood on the back of her pants and claimed that she was raped so hard that she bled through her pants. However, in the new propaganda lie that they started telling today, they show us that she clearly dirtied the back of her pants because her hands were bloody and tied behind her back. Also, they make very clear that she wasn't actually a civilian, but rather an IDF soldier, armed, who lost in a gun battle with Palestinian resistance fighters.
All of which you know already if you watched our show, which was ahead of all of this, right? Again, just demonstrating our value for why it's important to support this platform and take the time to watch our shows, as much as they may be longer than others. There's a reason they're longer, because we get into all this information. We break this down in explicit detail so you can understand it, not just repeat a headline screamed by somebody without giving you source material. At the end of the day, we talked about that exact thing, but there's two things to include in regard to the actual, just bring that back up, in regard to the actual image itself. Remember, I pointed out in real time, I just picked up on this, that there was no example of blood before. And on top of that, you can tell that, as I think it was the Squirrel, one of these accounts that broke it down. I wish I remembered exactly who, because this was a good catch. The ankle that was very clearly bloody, which you can see. And that she was getting out, you can see that she was sitting on her ankle. But in either case, there was no blood in the front, and it was only from the back. But even then, you should not dismiss the possibility that that's indicative of sexual abuse. But if you care about being proven, as a journalist should, it's all still subjective. And based on all of the lies we've been spun, it seems very clear that they're lying about most all of this. But in any case, the overall point is that this was not what they were saying. They did not say what they said. These are IDF members, which make them legal targets. And of course, I said at the same time, if they were beat up and tortured or hit, whatever else, those would be crimes, and we should hold them accountable for that. But you should care, regardless of any other dynamic, that you got lied to by your government about them being raped. Doesn't that seem disgusting? Yes. Now here, Dr. Logan Levkoff is one of these people that are coming out and continuing to push these narratives. And I find this interesting. She says, I just got back from Israel. And by the way, I don't see why she needed to go to Israel to watch this video, but there's a reason that they have to be in this special room and showing the special things. They're being manipulated. I just got back from Israel, where I was part of the I Believe Israeli Women delegation, which, again, this is ridiculous that they're tying back to old ridiculous things from before with Kavanaugh. Believe women was the chant, which implies that you're not supposed to question what they're saying. How does that possibly make sense? It's a momentum. This is about you creating momentum around the idea that if you disagree with them, you're somehow disregarding rape. Well, how do we know that's what happened? That's why we're supposed to question these things. And if it's verifiable, then yes, but this is a game. And it's, in fact, creating an area where people are more insecure. It's the same thing with Zionism and Judaism. They're, in fact, creating anti-Semitism by what they're doing. This is the same point. You are highlighting false claims, which actually put women at more risk. But it says that she was a part of the delegation. And it says, studying the sexual violence that took place in 10/7. The sexual violence, you mean the things that we can't verify, that there's no evidence for other than statements, and you're studying that? How exactly does that take place? And continues to the hostages. You realize, I mean, even the AP and others have come out and said the evidence they're presenting is falsified, if not unverified. Both of those are happening. This is what we get. You can watch the video if you want. And I posted the Associated Press article right at the bottom, which they don't seem to care, but they'd rather take Israeli words over actual investigations. But, that's up to them. And yet we get people like this that are still forcing in this argument. And let's not forget, for those that haven't seen it, Haaretz, the leading mainstream media article platform in Israel, has broken this down as lied about. I mean, the woman, baby from her stomach, the baby in an oven, the 40 beheaded babies, the 15 babies on a clothesline. All of these things are lies, guys, not up in the air. Complete, verifiable lies coming from the reality that there weren't that many babies in these locations, that they only ended up having two examples, I understand it, of babies or infants being killed that were there that day. And they're just lying, and they yet still push these arguments. Or Joe Biden coming out with new arguments about rope and kerosene. These are being made up whole cloth. And yet here he is pushing one of the clearest lies to the argument of mass atrocity or mass rape did not happen. Now, whether there were examples of it, I wouldn't dismiss. But even then, those should be up for debate right now because of how often they've lied and how little they can produce to claim that or prove that. But here, this person, Dumasani Washington, says Hamas terrorists praying before raping their captives. Not possibly, not because the words suggest that, but just stating it outright. These are infants, guys. People that would make these arguments, it's not objective. These are ridiculous people pushing the narrative that they want to be the case, which is kind of disgusting when you think about it. And he goes, but this is not a religious war. Well, obviously it is. And Israel and the Zionists have made that very clear. And the same way that they make it a religious war against Iran and the Middle East in regard to Shiite and Sunni and the way that they pit these, it's all created by these same elements. Not because they're praying, because you make it a religious war, because of your bigotry, because of your focus on creating that, while Israel turns itself into a theocratic state. In any case, Syrian Girl points out that they're still pushing this. This was posted less than 24 hours ago. It's from Israel and New York. Today, footage was screened in Times Square for the world to see, depicting that fake video they put forward of these women and their fake translations. That's what they shared. So ask yourself, this has already been 2 days ago. This was roundly shown to be a false translation. And even the smallest due diligence would have shown that. And yet somebody went right along and posted this right up there, even using the false statements they claim in Times Square. This is incredible. And as she says, Israel posting their losses, humiliating themselves in an expansive way. You can't kidnap an enemy combatant, right? Because that's what they say. They kidnap these people. You can't kidnap a person who is part of the military. You could detain them. You can still commit crimes against them, but it's not kidnapping. It just doesn't matter because it's all about framing this in a way that makes people outraged. That's the atrocity propaganda. Well, on a counterbalance point, let's make sure that we recognize not 75 years ago, it was being talked about then, it was being proven then and every year since, but this is new. This is from The Guardian, May 23rd. Whistleblowers allege widespread abuses at Israeli detention camps. How many is that now? 6 different IDF whistleblowers? That's not even counting the many that went on the record with 972 magazine, talking about how they were murdering people to kill, taking down buildings to take down buildings, the mass assassination programs. Those are all their statements. But we're talking about the IDF members that have spoke with a British mainstream media channel, speaking with many different platforms, admitting that they were murdering people. Now they're admitting that they were abusing and torturing people within these detention centers. And again, I just bring this up because it's important to see that this has already been shown back in, November? October 20th. Oh, this is the wrong one. That's important too. Amnesty International. Which one is it? Here we go. Oh, that's the same one. Hang it. Hold on. Is it not popping up for me? There it is. Perfect. So this one, since I grabbed it, I'll include it. Damning evidence of war crimes. Israel attacks wipe out entire families, proving with 5 different cases just between the 7th and the 12th that they were targeting innocent people or not taking any concern, both of which happened. And on October 20th, how did I just do that? I know I hit that properly. That is so strange. November 8th. Horrifying cases of torture and degrading treatment. This is from November 8th, and Amnesty already proved this. But add more evidence to the table, they're ignoring. The point is that they are absolutely not just torturing, but killing people inside detention. And there's a good video that I'm going to play for you right now that's being reported from a human rights group. This is Ryan Razbiani. Freedom of speech, the break room, I guess is what he's from. But the point is, exposing Israeli torture camps. Now, this is from IMEU, which is the Institute for Middle East Understanding. And we've shown you them before, along with the UN and others that made the same point, that the Israeli military uses what's called the neighbor procedure, which is 100% unequivocally a human shield practice. And they've called it out for a decade. Nobody cares. But we only pointed other unproven allegations on the other side while they keep getting caught using human shields just since October 7th. But the point is about what they're doing to them inside of detention.
20 years in Guantanamo, 20 detainees died there. Here we are speaking about a place that during 6 months, not 20 years, 6 months, 40 people who died there.
This is Sidi Timan, an Israeli military base that operates as an unofficial prison for an unknown number of Palestinian hostages from Gaza.
Now, just in case you missed that, I want to make sure, because it's important. He compared the deaths that have happened, provably, the ones they've admitted to, inside of detention centers since October 7th, to the entire time frame of Guantanamo Bay. Something that we all know is the atrocity that everybody's aware of, yet it's shockingly less than what's happened in the only democracy in the Middle East. Just let that sink in. And don't forget the involvement of Israel, both training and with the what happened in Guantanamo Bay. There's a reason for that.
And the conditions of Sidi Timan, they are nothing short of harrowing and deadly. According to testimonies leaked by Israeli health workers, the reality inside these walls are extremely grim. Palestinian hostages, stripped of their dignity and their clothes, are handcuffed to beds and forced to wear only diapers. They are left like this, without care, for 24 hours at a time. But it doesn't stop there. The treatment of these hostages from Gaza has led to dire consequences. We're talking about severe physical and psychological abuse, perpetuated by Israeli officers, like acts of humiliation, beatings, and grave instances of torture. And tragically, many have suffered injuries so extreme that they required limb amputations. Among those hostages are the most vulnerable, minors and elderly, who are subjected to these inhumane conditions.
Some of these people are minors. We heard about a 34-year-old guy who got arrested on his wheelchair and was brought on his wheelchair to Sidi Timan. His name is Azzeddin al-Banna, an 82 years woman who was arrested from her home with Alzheimer and brought to Israel in the Damun prison. And when we tried to visit her, we got an official information. She's an illegal combat and you can't visit her. That's the combats and the illegal combats that Israel is arresting.
Since October, Israeli authorities have withheld all information regarding the conditions of Palestinian hostages from human rights organizations and the media. This has severely impeded their work and intensified the anguish of prisoners' families, who are left uncertain whether their loved ones are alive or dead.
Families from Gaza are calling us, asking just a very simple question. Are our sons alive or not? But till now, we can't provide this answer. The official policy of the Israeli army regarding the detainees from Gaza is what we called forcible disappearing.
Just look at that, guys. I mean, there's always a narrative, an excuse, a disregarding. This is what's happening to these people. And compare it to the people that were coming out smiling, shaking hands, well-fed, given medical treatment, versus skin and bones, if not dead, losing limbs, having, bound so tight that you might, it's just so obvious. And if you disregard all that just because you think it might be lied about, which is fair, it certainly could be, look back at the history of the human rights groups, the United Nations, everybody else that has been highlighting this for decades now. It's all been there.
Forcible disappearing. It's not like happening through their work or through the arrest. No, it's the official policy.
As we explore the very dire conditions Palestinian hostages are subjected to by Israel, it's important to recognize that this isn't a new development. The torture and mistreatment of Palestinians have deep historical roots. Reports and documentation stretching back decades tell a consistent story of systematic abuse of Palestinians held by Israel, citing serious violations that span physical and psychological torture. Since October, Israel has confirmed the deaths of 40 Palestinians in its prisons. However, the full extent of these fatalities, including those resulting from Israel's lethal conditions, remains unknown.
Every Palestinian who under the custody of the Israeli authority is facing a very dangerous situation for his health and for his life even.
Israel must be held accountable for its widespread ill treatment and deaths of all Palestinian hostages. from those suffering inhumane conditions under Israel's prison service to all Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza who have been victims of Israel's ongoing genocide. The era of impunity must end. Israel's war crimes must cease now.
And don't forget, there's been, I can't even keep count of how many IDF soldiers over the years have come out and admitted all of this. Have TED Talks about how clearly they're breaking the law. It's incredible. Or people like Gideon Levy, who's a writer for Haaretz, who's been screaming about stuff like this forever. It's just shockingly obvious how long this has been going on. And we just talked about the which one was it? Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep. So this is the overlap that I was going to make here. Is that this is the Intercept highlighting the doctors and different people that have been taken that have never returned, and doctors are speaking out about this. Hundreds of Palestinian doctors disappeared into Israeli detention, gone, never to be seen again. No charge, no criminal, just gone. This is what we're dealing with. The Intercept, check it out for yourself. Here is actually, I thought this was next. Oh, you know what? That would have been good to bring that up there. Anyway, there's a point we're going to get to about another doctor speaking up about what he's seeing. There's an interview there. Did I lose that? That's interesting. Anyway, I'll bring it up later if I forgot it today. He's speaking on the record about what he's seeing. And it's the same as Nick Maynard and anybody else who's seen them execute people. And yet that's not enough. Not a Palestinian doctor, which shouldn't make any difference to you. Everybody is a person who has valid reason to call out what's happening, but a doctor from London or a doctor, or even Abu Sita, who's also Palestinian, but lives in London, who saw the same thing, or an endless amount of them who have watched them kill innocent people. Here, by the way, who doesn't care about any of that, is an American representative, Randy Fine. And we just showed you what he said and deleted the tweet because it was so egregious. Execute all of them or exterminate all, whatever he said, I forget off the top of my head, but things that are overtly criminal as far as I'm concerned, but supporting criminal activity. Here's what he said on top of that. This was yesterday or 2 days ago. I just want to be exceedingly clear. I could care less what happens to Gazans, so long as Americans, young girls, and babies are held hostage. Okay, so you can agree with that all you want. Maybe you agree. The point is, what you're acknowledging is you don't care about the law. As long as we're the ones being hurt or perceived that way, or we feel slighted, or we're the ones kidnapped, then the law doesn't matter. Well, yeah, that's become a very American, unfortunately, perspective, right? Might is right. Well, if it comes to us, then we're fighting for freedom, so you can shut up. Or the ICJ, you can go to hell. Yeah, we'll get to Lindsey Graham saying that right now. This is what we're dealing with, guys. These people are crazy. Now, I'm not saying that you should disregard the fact that there are people that you feel are accountable. And if you feel they're doing everything they claim, well, yes, that should upset you. But you should still care about Gazan average people. See, the point is they're inflating Hamas or whoever they're aiming at with every single Gazan. That used to be the thing in the beginning they said was blood libel. They said you were racist for pointing that out. We're defending and fighting for the innocent Palestinians. Look how fast that went away. It's unbelievable to me. And as I said, statements like this are appalling and deserve to be called out. What about the Palestinian Americans dying in Gaza, Randy Fine? Oh, I guess you don't care about those Americans. So what does that show you, guys? This is disgusting. And yes, those are Gazans. And some of them have American family members that were also there when this started, that weren't Palestinian Americans, but were just Americans. And they too are stuck there, but they don't care about them. I wonder why. It seems they only care about the Israeli side of the conversation. What do you think that shows you? I think it was, what's it right here? Asaf MD simply says, dude, you're a state rep in Florida. No one cares what you think about geopolitics. It's funny. But here on same point, here's Brian Mast, who I've really been focusing on lately because of how alarmingly obvious his statements are. And I mean, like to the point of, and this is, you could argue, I mean, everyone's going to have their opinion, but I think like from a legal standpoint, like legitimately going by the book, he's very clearly flirting with treason. I mean, you can decide for yourself, but check this out. He says, well, this is the first part. He says, I never bow to pro-Hamas sympathizers, which clearly is not what they are. Most of these people, in fact, have made it clear that they don't support Hamas. They simply support Palestinian self-determination. But even if they do support Hamas, isn't that your right as an American? Apparently not to this American representative, but he says, I will always put America first. And what he means is Israel first. That's what he's actually talking about. General Strike here points out, those are called your constituents. That's who they are. So this is my point from before. Have you ever seen politicians? I mean, what we used to get is them at least pretending to, yeah, whatever you want me to say, that's what I think to get a vote. Not today. Not if it comes against Israel. And he says, you know, this is an elected position, right? Israel's actually not part of America. And of course, this is a great video just showing you how all of them are getting, $500,000 to $6 million, depending on how important they are in their eyes from AIPAC. But here's where it gets even more alarming. This actually floored me today. He says every week, hundreds of pro-Hamas protesters come to Congress. Again, just willfully manipulating what they're... I was going to make a point today about a lot of lies he's making. I'll cover it soon. But just coming out and just egregiously lying for Israel. And I'm talking in embarrassing ways. Like, even that I find embarrassing. It's very clear that at least some of these people are not supporting Hamas, and all of them are not protesting for Hamas. They're protesting for Palestine to have self-determination, which, again, 30 seconds ago, all of these posers were saying they wanted. But it says they scream and shout and harass lawmakers, hoping to intimidate them into abandoning our strongest ally in the Middle East. No, they're petitioning the government to act in their interest. But of course, to you, that's against Israel, so therefore that doesn't work, which shows you what you're really fighting for. Harass lawmakers? Like, watch these videos for yourself. They're walking alongside them. He doesn't like that they're asking questions that make him feel stupid. The point is, they won't succeed, he says. That's because for every Code Pink moron, again, his constituents, there is someone like Benya Shurlo. Benya is an IDF soldier who just got back from deployment in Rafah. Instead of resting with his family, he's in Washington, which to me suggests that he's not even an American. He's an Israeli who's in the IDF. Because my point is, Brian Mast is an IDF member, which is absolutely mind-blowing to me. But either way, it's an IDF member. Whether it's a Brian Mast example or somebody that's from Israel, he says he's in Washington telling lawmakers what's happening on the ground. Right, because he's going to give you all the true story, right, as they murder children and commit genocide. And he says, on the ground, pushing back against Hamas propaganda. This is why this is important. This is an alleged U.S. representative openly disregarding, it's his prerogative, if he wants to get voted out if you think that's what really happens. I don't. But openly disregarding, even attacking, disparaging his own constituency right in front of them, while going even farther by saying he, instead of his listening to his constituents of American individuals, he listens to a member of a foreign nation's military. How is that even remotely acceptable in anybody's eyes? Cries of anti-Semitism aren't going to hide this. And I said again, to make it even more clear, imagine if this was Brian or any other member of the U.S. government being a part of China's military or Russia's or any other governments instead of the IDF, of which he is a member, don't forget. And then openly disparaging his own constituents who take issue with that. And then after that, sitting down with the Chinese military to make policy decisions and then posting about it. It's another government, guys. There's no way to misunderstand that. Just because you think Israel's your ally, it's another government with its own interests. And you are watching him disregard his constituents to go, hey, what do you think, foreign military member? That's just unbelievably crazy to me, guys. And yet this is okay in the eyes of a lot of people in our government. Now, Alon Mizrahi points out, this has been the most hectic, bizarre, and borderline psychedelic week. This is what's happened. On Sunday, a helicopter carrier, or Iran's prime minister, goes missing. Raisi is officially confirmed dead. Karim Khan announces he's seeking arrest warrants for Netanyahu. Gallant. Tuesday, Ireland announces to recognize the Palestine. Norway, Spain do the similar thing. On Friday, the ICJ rules that the situation in Rafah is disastrous and that Israel is required to safeguard citizens, which we know they're not. The court orders it to stop, which, by the way, we'll get to in a minute, as Sam Husseini points out, is definitely binding and that there's legal obligations involved, as much as they're saying otherwise. And the international journey for justice in Palestine went in days, from lazy gestures to warp speed, enforceable, sanctionable, concrete action and binding declarations. And this, excuse me, he says, this is the week Israel's actions started to really catch up with it. Why is it important and meaningful? He says, first of all, there's a cumulative cultural effect. When Israel is denounced by formal institutions again and again, the narrative changes, even if those institutions are doing so for dishonest reasons. And it says now, and I added that, if you protest against Israel, you are on the side of international law, even if you disagree with that they're honest or that they're lying. The point is, they represent the international, arguably, as they've always told us to look to these groups, we're supposed to believe they represent international law. And conversely, he says the police and your politicians are on the side of international crime. That's pretty crazy to think about right now. There is very little any political structure can do against such huge normative shifts. He says, but there is also a very concrete and tangible aspect to this. From this week onward, Any institution, organization, or company that wants to divest from Israel will have more and more stable, reliable legal basis to do so. And so pressures on the economy and cultural fronts are going to mount significantly, especially as it is clear that Israel is not going to comply. In this regard, he says, I would bet it will escalate very soon, as its old habit when forced with harsh criticism. They just triple down. Finally, although the ICC and ICJ, he says, are two separate institutions, both live and operate in the same political time and space. Israel's refusal to comply with the ICJ's ruling, therefore, makes the probability of arrest warrants for Netanyahu and the rest higher. And of course, the ICJ part of that says, and once those are given, Israel's position with the ICJ is even more deplorable. And it says, we don't know what stimulated this sudden outburst. I think it's just people recognizing the writing on the wall, opportunists. He says, my gut feeling tells me that it's what's happening this week, although a long time brewing was still crystallized and precipitated by a certain helicopter incident that happened. Now, that's it for you to decide. I actually think it's something much bigger, but that was part of it. But he goes, but be it as it may, Israel's catastrophic cruelty is gradually being matched by the equally catastrophic mess it has created for itself. And this is but a very, very gentle beginning. Interesting. And one example of that, by the way, this is from 2 days ago. Academic boycotts over Gaza jeopardize Israel's place in Horizon Europe, which is some big commission in regard to the tech field, which they're very proud about. It says some Israeli researchers say the country is already being shut out of Horizon Europe. Quote, they were told to leave the consortia, because they were Israeli, not Jews, but Israeli. That's very important. And a law professor who was heading a task force in Hebrew University of Jerusalem monitoring the boycott attempts said it was very blunt. He said an internal Israeli Ministry of Intelligence report compiled in mid-April and seen by Science Business warns that the growing wave of European boycotts, quote, pose risks to Israel's scientific technological position in the world. I think that's a great thing. And in the long run, could lead to damage to national security and strength of Israel's economy. Now, I'm not saying that in the sense that we want the average people in Israel to suffer, but the point is that the way the current government is going, they should not have that kind of influence. And this is the point we're talking about that Whitney's talked about, the Unit 8200 overlaps, the Carbine 911, the many different examples of the scientific overlaps that are being manipulated for the benefit of Israel at the expense of other countries. It says it also warns that the boycott movement risks stopping Israeli scientists joining research consortia as a part of Horizon Europe. The point is, then, one example, which is huge and important to the Israel government direction, they're getting boxed out. And you can argue that's because people suddenly see it or because they recognize it could hurt their interests elsewhere. That's my point. And I think that's very important. I think this is going to continue. Now, on to the point of both the ICC and the ICJ, starting with first Norway and Ireland and Spain. We just saw again that they were forced to watch this video. Now, I think this is a hilarious image to represent that. Israel will be like, and it says here, watch this altered video with false subtitles and suited video editing with missing parts. Consume my propaganda or else. It says this video was already debunked and ridden with false misinformation before they even presented it to them. It's crazy. Here is, forced to watch this, and yet nonetheless, they are still standing by what this general sentiment.
Pressure needs to continue to be applied by all across the world for an immediate ceasefire. We'll continue to do that in every fora available to us. But when I spoke to the Palestinian president this evening, he did say to me what today's actions by Ireland, Norway and Spain have done is provide a beacon of hope to the Palestinian people. And that hope at such a dark time is important. Symbolism matters. Political decisions matter.
I agree. Now, that's Ireland. Now, the rest of them are taking similar stances at that point, despite the push. Now, this is also interesting. Here's Danny Danon, who's the 17th permanent representative to the UN for Israel, says it's truly unbelievable. The deputy prime minister of Spain is advocating for the ethnic cleansing of all Jews. Is that what she's doing? No, not even remotely. That's because they say when, you even say words, like, at this point, it's as stupid as arguing you say words that start with the letter P, you somehow mean Palestine, which means you want all Jews to die. It's really stupid the way they're stretching this. Her statement is about the river to the sea. That's not what it means. Anybody with a brain, no, of course, you could secretly mean that, but to pretend anybody saying that very basic sentence means what you want to mean is childishly stupid. And the reality of it, that Palestine should be free from the river to the sea, doesn't mean ethnic cleansing. It means that people should be free. That if you only see that as countering what your existence should mean, that means you see them as a threat to your existence, not because they're threatening your existence. It's because you don't want them to exist. The point is that the two-state solution has been endorsed even by Hamas at this point. You can call it dishonest. The point is that they want something of their own, and they want them to be free no matter where they are. And what's embarrassing about this is you can show, as I've shown many times, and he's even when Elon Musk said, you're not allowed to say it from the river to the sea, except he allowed everybody on Israel's side to continue to say it, which is such obvious manipulation. My point was, well, here's the Likud party founding charter that literally says, and it's much more explicit, between the sea and the Jordan, there will be only Israeli sovereignty. You see how different that is than saying Palestine will be free, as opposed to saying only Israeli sovereignty will exist in this area? That is far more indicative of ethnic cleansing. And clearly, because they're absolutely ethnically cleansing, it's easier to see. But I would still argue that you wouldn't blindly assume that would mean that. Of course, you could mean something else. We're not children like they are, screaming the narrative you want to be heard over the top of something that is clearly up in the air. But I think it's important to see. And he says, in the midst of our struggle for survival, we are now seeing clearly who stands with us and who stands against us. Well, yeah, if you're talking about the state of Israel and the Zionist crimes, then yeah, I think that's very clear. Of course, what he means is Jews against the world. And you're seeing this massive push from everybody. I mean, it's actually pretty crazy. I didn't want to focus on it today. Of these high-level journalists and people around the world and politicians coming out and saying, you know what, screw the whole world. Or Elon saying that it clearly shows that everybody is, basically the sentiment is that everybody is against the Jews. Now, what's crazy about that is, how do you say that in the face of all the other government representatives that are clearly desperately standing on your side? How are they supposed to take that? Suddenly now you're like, well, screw everybody. Well, yeah, that's what's happening, because the reality is the world has shifted. They do see what Israel and Zionism are doing, and the only direction they can go is you hate Jews. Certainly some of them probably do in some places in the world, but it's no more than any other racist element that we can highlight. In fact, I argue that if it does grow, it's because of what they're doing right now, not because of genuine, organic hatred for Jews for no reason. But they're desperate and they'll push it. Now here, Israel Katz says, in response to Spain's recognition of a Palestinian state and the anti-Semitic calls by Spain's deputy prime minister to not just recognize a Palestinian state, but to liberate Palestine from the river to the sea, I have decided to sever the connection between Spain's representatives and in Israel and the Palestinians, and to prohibit the Spanish consulate in Jerusalem from providing services to Palestinians from the West Bank. Okay, so they said from the river to the sea, and you cut off funding for random Palestinians in the West Bank? How do we not see how disgustingly obvious that is? One, they see them all as criminals. They see them all as the same, and that you're collectively punishing people that aren't even in Gaza from a group, because one element of the Spanish government said something that it's not even what it means, or what you're claiming it means. Guys, this is childish. This is a child stomping their feet and attacking innocent people to try to make you. It's like saying, look at what she made me do. Look at how bad she is because I killed that person. It's on her because she said those mean words. It's increasingly hard to miss the childish nature of all of this. Sadly, these people are very powerful, and it's alarming what they're able to do when they're this childish. Now, here's what Elon Levy said a couple days ago. I highlighted it then, which is just embarrassing. So Ireland, Spain, and Norway said they would recognize a Palestinian state, which these same people pretended they wanted very recently. But now, when they do that, Ireland is encouraging Hamas to abduct more Jewish babies. I don't even, it's just so embarrassing. Spain is encouraging Hamas to burn more Jewish families. Norway is encouraging Hamas to rape more Jewish women. Almost every part of that has been proven to not even have happened. But at the end of the day, they're supporting Palestine. But this is screeching. This is desperation. And here's what he continued forward. The funny part is I could have given you 14 tweets he made over the last 4 days that are just basically the same thing in another way 3 hours later. And then again, and then again, and then again, because that's what propaganda is. He goes, Ireland's prime minister just gave Palestinian terrorists a material incentive to burn more Jewish families. You know, the thing, again, that provably didn't happen. But he's upset. His ambassador was forced to watch a video of the atrocities. No, they know you shared lies with them, that you used a political mechanism that they actually honor, that you ignore anything that the resolutions, or like, for instance, if it was done in the reverse and they called on Israel to come to them to watch something, they would have said no. because they don't care about any of these things. Nothing is sacred to them. Yet they went knowing what was going to happen, was forced to watch the ridiculous snuff film, part of which was the video we already showed you where they lied, mistranslated, and completely misrepresented the whole thing. And so they came out and said, they're wrong, and they can't stand it. But exactly explain how calling for a Palestinian state, disregarding your lies, is them giving material incentive to burn more Jewish families, which, by the way, they were burned by IDF bombs, which is admitted many times, or rather, in this case, tanks. That's admitted by people that were in that building. It's admitted by people that were there, the security heads of the kibbutz. All right, but, facts don't matter when you're screaming atrocity propaganda. He went a couple hours later. We find it totally unacceptable that Ireland rewarded Palestinian terrorists for raping Jewish women. It's just lie on top of screaming lie, and gave them reason to do it again. Well, the rape didn't happen according to all the evidence we have, and they're not rewarding anybody with anything. They're simply acknowledging what Palestine has a right to have. And for to these authoritarian maniacs, it's only something that can be given by powerful people. That's how they view the world. Here is the Spanish prime minister simply saying, when the war ends in Gaza, citizens will realize, and they already have, that we have witnessed one of the darkest moments in the 21st century. He says, I want the Spanish to be satisfied with their government that has been on the right side of history. Good for him. Even if it is opportunism, good for him for saying it. And here was what I was going to say before. It's just a 1-minute clip of a doctor telling you why it's one of the darkest times in history. Children shot in the head, man with spinal injury in a wheelchair, bound and handcuffed for weeks until his hip bones exposed, patients with fractured limbs dragged along the floor by the external fixators, beaten with metal bars. It's disgusting. Here's the full interview. Here's just a clip they shared. This is from the Watermelon Reports. I'm not familiar with it, but this is a doctor from London. Here's his account, by the way, a surgeon. I think this just adds to the rest of what we've already seen.
A very dark side to the Israeli state that people are not aware of. And we're seeing it in front of our eyes at the moment. It's changing the whole makeup of Gazan population. You walk around the hospitals, you see people with amputations everywhere. And there are a lot of people, there are children who I met also, who had lost all their families. He describes being, again, blindfolded and handcuffed for 50 days and beaten with metal bars. He said to me, I'm not the only one that was beaten with metal bars. Everyone there was beaten with metal bars on a regular, often daily basis. And he showed me his wrists. His wrists were both swollen from the handcuffs. And he showed me the x-ray. The x-ray showed clearly he had multiple rib fractures on both sides. So for anybody who sits on the other side of this argument and says, well, this is a complicated issue, we should perhaps stay neutral and let it be, I don't think understands the scale of what's going on.
Right. And silence is complicity. That's what we're talking about. Like, that's where the real time to point out this is what you would have done in World War II. That's where that statement applies, right? What you're doing now is what you would have done in the face of what was going on then. Here's what Khaleesi highlights. Then we've talked about this guy before, an Israeli Knesset member who is openly discussing what's going on. And I forget if he was ultimately kicked out of the Knesset or he was able to maintain his position, but I know they were attempting to kick him out because he was highlighting the reality. Here he is simply going on to say that this was going on long before October 7th and in the West Bank.
Look, I want to be very, very blunt and very, very clear. There is an ethnic cleansing going on in the West Bank before the massacre of 7th of October. So 3 or 4 days before the massacre committed by Hamas, I visited the Jordan Valley, some pastors, communities of Palestinian ones in the West Bank. And I realized then that already 4 communities were totally eliminated. They had to flee because of the ongoing daily pogroms committed by settlers under the auspices of the occupation forces. We are talking about a territory double than the city of Tel Aviv. And since October 7th, it rised into Palestinian communities that literally perished.
Now realize this is a member of, or at least a former, if not current member of the Knesset, who is speaking about what they've been doing in the West Bank and continue to do now. And they are murdering and raping and pillaging. And this is being reported by literally everybody, including corporate media. And somehow it doesn't seem to factor into the conversation for these politicians.
There's an ongoing.
What are you saying? You're saying that in the West Bank, we're not talking about Gaza now. We're saying in the West Bank. You believe that the settlers are making an effort to drive Palestinians out by force.
Successful efforts. More than 20 communities, Palestinian communities of innocent shepherds, poor people that I visited. I know many of them personally. Good people, have nothing to do with, violence or whatever. They are assaulted on a continuous basis, a daily basis, for years.
It's incredible that we can have so much evidence from members of the Knesset, politicians, human rights groups, and yet these people like Lindsey Graham continue to push this forward. I mean, this is one of the most shocking things I've ever seen in my life, that it's literally everybody, like the vast majority, and these are the maniacs that are keeping this going. It's just incredible to me. And I think that's why increasingly they're getting worried that they may actually end up in jail. Here he is saying, and we showed you this before, if they do it, we're talking about the ICJ. If they do it, Israel is now, this is the ICC we're talking about, the ICC in regard to the arrest warrants. If they do it, then we're next, right? Well, here is Speaker Johnson saying the same thing. And as Censor Man points out, it's strange that he just follows the lead, right? Somebody is putting these things into the, like when we saw them say there's no equivalence, and every politician across the board seemed to put the same thing out, even though nobody even said that. Where is that coming from? You know damn well where that's coming from. First Lindsey Graham and now Speaker Johnson. If the ICC is allowed to threaten Israel, we're next. Well, you know what? I keep highlighting this today. That's kind of a self-own, don't you think? Where, like an own goal, right? Where you are literally going, well, they're going to come after us. And we're going, well, yeah, because you're criminals. Like, I think they're leaning into something. They're so lacking of self-awareness, they don't realize that the world has shifted their opinion of them. Or maybe they just don't care. Here is Orson Ostrovsky, the pretend international human rights lawyer, who says the same thing. Israel slams Germany for saying it would arrest, deport Netanyahu. Germany, who's been like one of the leading supporters of Israel the whole time, and they just go, well, it's the law, we have to. And here's what they respond with. Well, the Germans do know a thing or two about arresting and deporting Jews. And by the way, which is exactly, save for a word or two, what 2 or 3 other people said almost identically. So again, it's just this constant flow of the same propaganda being pushed out. You'll probably see little Mikey Rappaport doing the same thing tomorrow. They just constantly follow the lead. It's disgusting. And here is a former ICC chief prosecutor telling you just the starvation would have been enough.
Ever think of going after Israel or investigating Israel-Palestine? At the time, you didn't have jurisdiction at the time.
For 3 years, the Palestinians came to my office asking to intervene. I told them, look, I'm sorry, you have a problem, you are not state. They were very smart and told me, let us brief you about it. Yes, you can brief me. And they were briefing me for 3 years. Israel was furious with me, and America was furious with me. I did not care. I kept and that's why in 2012, the General Assembly accepted Palestine as a state. And that's why later, Palestine became a state, and 2021, the court opened the investigation. That's why when Karim Khan arrived, he was able to open the investigation immediately.
I realize how important that is. We already covered this, but legally speaking, according to them, they are a state. And by the way, it always has been. It's an occupied state. But the point is that from whatever angle you spin this, these screeching cries of that it's not a state, therefore this doesn't apply, from Matt Miller and the rest, they're lying. They know they're lying.
And right now, in your personal view, I just want to reiterate, you do believe Israel is guilty of war crimes and genocide.
I'm not saying it's guilty. I believe
should be investigated for war crimes and genocide.
No. Should be investigated for war crimes, and whatever crime you have evidence. Karim said regarding genocide, he's still collecting evidence. That's fine.
But you personally think it's a genocide. You said that.
I said that my opinion is you should open an investigation on genocide. That's fine. But opening case on starvation is strong enough. It's good enough. I don't need 12 indictments.
Clear. Now, here's another interesting point that I think is ridiculous. Muhammad Shihada points out, Israel leaks a recording of a meeting between the ICC prosecutor Khan and Israeli families that was 56 days into the genocide that's being committed. Only 15,000 Gazans have been killed at that point, which I can't horribly even say that out loud. It's unbelievable what we're talking about. Now, what's interesting about this, Khan makes no mention of the slaughter in Gaza, only humanitarian aid, and says there's, quote, no equivalence. Interesting. You see where this comes from? So he says there's no equivalence in a secret discussion with the Israeli government, right? Now, when this whole thing comes out, the Israeli government says, no, they don't say that. They make the U.S. government say that. Do you not see how obvious that is? So they're the ones that push the U.S. representatives, U.S. puppets out there to say what they heard and made, and now they leaked the whole thing. Without Israel, I mean, so clearly, yes, Israel also said that. The point is, this is how this propaganda works. Now, even further, he says there's no equivalence between the IDF and Hamas, which he repeatedly condemns and invokes ISIS multiple times. Then he says he cried upon hearing Israelis' testimonies and spent half an hour showing an outpouring of sympathy to Israel and the victims of October 7th, but urged them not to hate. Now, here's what's crazy. They're putting this out to say, look at this, like he's a hypocrite. Here he is telling us he cares, but now here he is accusing us of crimes. Well, sure enough, we're 7 months, 8 months down the line, and arguably he's highlighting crimes for both sides. But what's incredible to me is that they're just so lacking self-awareness that they dump this out there, which is just lacking integrity, and saying that this means he's a hypocrite. But as Shihada points out, despite all of this and him clearly pleading and crying, they now call him one of the, quote, greatest anti-Semites in modern times, as soon as he went after Netanyahu. Again, showing you how flimsy this is, that they are the ones that actually create, they downgrade the reality of people. They make it to where people don't even think anti-Semitism exists, which of course it does. Racism exists. It's not a crime. It's not a secret, but it's not what they're claiming it is. And the problem is that what they're doing is creating that. And now they turn on this person who's clearly probably on their side more than they even want people to see. And yet this is how flimsy it is, because just like attacking Germany, they go after whoever they want, whenever they want, and lie about whatever they can. And here's the Israeli article that breaks this down. You can read it for yourself. Now, this I find hilarious. Laura Meacham highlights this. This is basically, and by the way, again, this is being quoted, even though it's actually not what he said. Is to the best of my knowledge, I was only able to find what we already played for you, but it's funny. Charging me for crimes in Gaza is like charging George Bush for 9/11. It's like, yeah, a little too on the nose there, buddy. That's exactly the point. But here's the clip that we actually know it's, at least I believe I can prove it's from. It's not exactly the quote, but here's what he said, and we played it before.
It's creating a false symmetry between the democratically elected leaders of Israel and the terrorist chieftains. That's like saying after 9/11, well, I'm issuing arrest warrants for George Bush, but also for bin Laden.
And I think that's where it comes from. So technically we shouldn't be quoting it, but either way, it's hilarious to argue that that's exactly the point, man. And he doesn't say false equivalence, right? But I think that is where I believe that's where that came from. Now we're getting short on time, but I wanted to make sure we got to this last segment. And if we don't get to the other part about the hostages and Shawnee Luke, we will get to that. But here he points out, and this is in regard to the ICJ. And this is the ICJ that is ordering them to stop. Entire world is now voted against genocide on cover highlights. And only U.S. supports the Israeli genocide. Here's what the ICJ announced.
States of Israel shall, in conformity with its obligation under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and in view of the worsening conditions of life faced by civilians in the Rafah government, A, by 13 votes to 2, immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that would bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. In favor, President Salam, Judges Abraham, Yusuf, Shway, Bandari, Iwasawa, Volte, Charlesworth, Brown, Gomez Robledo, Cleveland, Oresco, Tlad.
Now he's just reading off their names. But here's the next part, and this is in front of the United Nations. But of course, the false human rights lawyer, Arsen Ostrowski, and I'm saying that as facetiously, he claims he is, he probably is, but clearly does not care about human rights, says, FYI, the ICJ presiding judge, Solomon of Lebanon, reading out the verdict now, was also previously Lebanon's ambassador to the United Nations. Right. The whole point is, he's from Lebanon. He must be a terrorist, right? These people are disgusting. He says, here he is in 2016. Guess what? Accusing Israel of apartheid, war crimes, and terror. And this is my point. Yeah, oops. Kind of a self-goal there, buddy. Yeah, that's the point, because they're verifiably doing that. And he says, we're supposed to believe he's impartial? Exactly. Now, I don't believe any of these people are impartial. My point is, you can verifiably prove all three of those things. The leading human rights groups, even B'Tselem as an Israeli human rights group, has clearly proven that it's an apartheid state. But they just can't. They're desperate. They don't know what else to do.
Madam President, we must now admit that our condemnations for 50 years in this assembly, all of these illegal acts, even when expressed in the strongest terms, as we say in our diplomatic jargon, have all failed to put an end to the continued Israeli occupation of the state of Palestine. It's high time that we move in the United Nations beyond such mere condemnations in this assembly. It is the UN Security Council that should shoulder its responsibilities by enforcing its own resolutions relating to the illegality of settlement activities and by calling for concrete measures to put an end to the occupation of the state of Palestine according to a clear and binding time frame.
Not Gaza or West Bank, but the state of Palestine. That's important.
Madam President, to turn this into a reality, I would like to ask you, in conclusion, to reflect on the following words of great wisdom uttered by a great man, Bishop Desmond Tutu, and I quote, "If apartheid ended, so can the occupation. But the moral force and international pressure will have to be just as determined." End of quote. Allow me to repeat it one more time.
Now, that's important. Now, here's what Israel said in response to this. The charges of genocide brought by South Africa against Israel at the International Court of Justice in The Hague are false, outrageous, and morally repugnant. Of course, the verifiable, overwhelming amount of evidence to back it up. False, outrageous, and morally repugnant. Following the horrific attack against the civilians on October 7th, Israel embarked upon a defensive and just war to eliminate Hamas and to secure the release of our hostages. I mean, even the U.S. just stated that they've killed, 30%, which, by the way, doing simple math, admits they've killed at least 20,000 innocent people. It's just incredible to think that they can say these things with a straight face. Israel is acting based on its right to defend its territory. You mean it's illegally occupied territory. None of this stands with anybody who has integrity, who can acknowledge the basic realities of the history around this. Consistent with its moral values and compliance with international law. Here's what's embarrassing about this. Now, you can say that they're compromised. They're all Hamas or whatever else. Sure, should need to prove that, shouldn't you? But the ICJ and the ICC collectively are two of the major parts of what we call international law. Whether or not you agree with they're honest or that they should be. That's how it currently is. And so for them to say we're in compliance with international law while two of the central parts of international law are saying, no, you're not, is ridiculous. I mean, on its face, ridiculous. We should all be laughing about how ridiculous that is. Israel has not and will not conduct military actions in the Rafah area, which may, citing what they said, inflict on the Palestinian civilian population in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in part or in whole. Oh, yeah? Well, what about this? This is a tent in Rafah that got bombed yesterday. I mean, it's crazy that they can even pretend. I mean, look at this, guys. These are just tents. There's the argument that these are anything but random people. And as she highlights, the Israel airstrikes refugees living in tents as a message to the ICJ, who told them to stop massacring people. Israel is telling the world they are terrorists. That's what she says. I agree. I mean, how in the world do you take that as anything else? That's in response to this. It's childish, but people's lives are at stake. Here is another example. This one, the same thing. This is Halad Falud saying, breaking, sources in Gaza are reporting a massive IDF attack on Rafah. This is a different one. You can see by the smoke plume. As the ICJ circus tells him to stop. And he goes, now that's how it's done. Oh, so the international community says, stop the illegal thing and it's binding. And you go, who cares? And that's how it's done? Yeah, obviously. Of course, Israel ignores the order to stop. Take note of all the people still cheering on Gaza, the genocide. Only the real villains are standing by this at this point, guys. Remember them forever. Truly, think about this. Only the real worst of the worst are continuing to stand by this, whether they're Republican or Democrat or people in the middle. They are obviously the problem if you see them supporting what is happening here. It's like with the COVID conversation. At some point, you recognize there's no excuse for still not recognizing what's happening. Now, Suppressed News highlights Israel uses fake stories to justify bombing Rafah. The Israeli propagandists, and we've talked about the person they claim they were going after, Mohammed Shabana. It turns out it's a fake story. Big surprise. They justify the strike on Rafah right after the ICJ to order them to stop by creating a false story to try to assassinate what they claim was a senior military Hamas member. They announced an operation to assassinate him in Rafah, of course, and mainstream outlets that they seem to control pumped the same story out. Turns out He's an Egyptian journalist, and he's not even in Gaza. He has podcasts on YouTube that are recent as of 4 hours ago on the 24th. I mean, guys, it's like they lie about things that they know people can prove. How else do you frame that but desperate? Here's Elon Levy. And this is my point. They just desperately screech these things out. This is from yesterday. The ICJ just buried 125 hostages, another foot underground, by pressuring Israel to abandon them to their rapist captors. Again, the rape lie, abandon them. Who in the world is asking you to abandon them? In fact, the people that are there are dying because you refuse to accept the deals that you've been offered 7 or 8 times. It's insulting. And how in the world does the idea to make you stop bombing put them further underground? I mean, this is so ludicrous. But these are the representatives or the ones that were fired. And then he says the ICJ just created a safe zone for Hamas terrorists to rape hostages with impunity. They're being laughed at right now. This is how bad this is. He says, I'm not sure the reputation of the ICJ will survive this. Talk about projection. Complete breakdown of a cornerstone of the international rules-based order. Right? You mean the group, now you're pretending that this was the time? You mean, so why did you disregard their statements all the other times? These people are cartoonish. The reputation will survive. Yeah, I think you're talking about yourself. Going forward, he puts out this cartoon showing there's 5 in that video, but 4 that are IDF members, all of which were taken from a base, none of which there's any evidence to claim anything else happened other than what they are lying about. Today, the ICJ created a safe zone in Gaza, he says, where Hamas can rape hostages with impunity. Oh, weird. He just said that. Yeah, because he just repeated it a couple hours later with a picture. I'm not sure how they can survive. That's desperate, guys. Aviva Klampas chimes in and says, Hamas issued a statement welcoming the International Court of Justice decision. You getting this, she says? A terror group is applauding the UN's court. What does that say about the UN's court? Quite a desperate move right there. At the very least, because just because somebody stands up and goes, I agree with that, that somehow means something that they should think. Or that, this is like the KKK endorsing Trump or something, and they go, Trump's a KKK member. It's dumb. It's lowbrow. It's stupid. But the point is, it's a cell phone. That's a self-goal right there. Now, of course, Hamas could be lying. Who knows what they care about? But for them to stand up, which they've done before, and said, look, we'll stand by whatever the court rules. And then for them going, look, they did it when we're not. How do you not see how bad that makes you look? And he goes, yeah, because they respect international authorities more than you. At the very least, you can argue it's true that there's more than you. Who knows if they really care or not? And it says it shows that you're a state, not a state, but a bunch of settlers. I just think it's crazy. And that's why I did the same thing with a little self-goal. Whoops. You made it clear that the terrorist group is more willing to comply than you are. And of course, Asal Rod points out, New York Times makes it seem like a local court with no power just ruled against Israel. I mean, the ICJ means of enforcement is the fact that the countries like the U.S. are supposed to act in accordance with international law. But it gets more than that, in fact. But this is how they framed it. A UN court ordered Israel to end its Rafah operation, adding to international pressure on Israel, even though the court has no means of enforcement. It's a shocking downplaying of what's really happening. Lindsey Graham, of course, says, as far as I'm concerned, the ICJ can go to hell. This guy's just such a ridiculous person. And here's what Solomon Ahmad points out, that they already left diplomatic vocabulary, and now they've switched to complete gangsters. He says not even the biggest dictators in the world use that kind of vocabulary. It's really obvious that they're desperate, I think. And I've said it a lot, but I really think that's obvious. Tom Cotton says the fake globalist court, and I think there's a reason they're using that term, is to try to draw in the idea of the Republicans that might be pushing back against that more, to make them resist what's obviously being seen here, whether or not it's a globalist court. It says, issued a fake order, so it's fake now? It's Israel not to defend itself against savage terrorists. It's just incredible. How about this court order Hamas to release the hostages? You mean like literally everybody's already done and said, stop that, do that, and they didn't do it, so now what? They've all done that already, man. They just want you to think it's one-sided when it clearly is not, especially as literally the ICJ or the ICC has issued arrest warrants for 3 of their leaders. But they just want to frame a false narrative because, as we can see, they make a lot of money from AIPAC. I think that's clearly part of this. But it goes, and order them to immediately stop using civilians as human shields and political pawns. The same old narrative, despite the fact that you can prove Israel currently has been caught doing that at least 5 times since October 7th. Now, here's the important part. Kind of wrap towards this at the end. Sam Husseini highlights the ICJ states, quote, the court, and he cites the right there, and you can look up the link for yourself from 54, number 54 within their charter, the statute under Article 41. It says, have binding effect. The court recalls that the orders on provisional measures under Article 41 of the statute have binding effect and thus create international legal obligations for any party to whom the provisional measures are addressed. This is very important. Now, whether you think this is that Israel then is bound by this, or the fact that other countries who are bound, who are signatories to the ICJ, the World Court, are very clearly bound to do something about this. So my point is, there is absolutely legally binding effect to this that they're disregarding from the U.S. and Israel. It's important. But David Collier highlights Hamas has over 100 hostages. Hamas is in Rafah. Right? I'll just state things. Let's just say things we like. Right? Scream out things you want people to believe with no evidence. The ICJ is basically telling Israel it's, quote, not allowed to pursue Hamas to rescue hostages, even though they keep killing them, that Hamas took when they massacred 1,200 Israelis. No, actually, it was, what's funny is he used Israelis instead of Jews, because half of them were clearly people that they aren't including usually, but in 1,200 number has been proven to be false from every angle at this point. Many of them were Hamas members that they burned alive. But it says the ICJ can go stuff itself. The point is, what he's trying to make the argument here is that they're telling you you're not allowed to do it. No, they're telling you to do it within the law. But you see, his argument is, oh, so if we can't just murder everybody, then we can't even do it. Again, a complete self-own. You're making these arguments that make it clear that you think the only option is murdering everybody indiscriminately. No, you could go in there surgically and actually try to kill. Like, this is what we talked about from the very beginning. No, instead, they just bomb places in Rafah. AIPAC says Israel's a democracy with a robust and independent judiciary that is fighting a just war in a moral manner. Again, AIPAC, a group that's supposedly an American entity representing American interest that screams about how another country is a democracy. Yeah, that really makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? But the point we just made, and I think Jason's going to make a clip about this from a previous show, it does not have an independent judiciary. And this is from 2018, where a very prominent judge from Canada's Supreme Court spoke up and said, what they're doing will destroy their independent judiciary, saying that without that, it won't be a democracy. And the point is, the thing she says that might do that has already happened a long time ago. Here's an article just from recently, from the 2023 of February. Thousands in Israel protest. These were the judicial reforms. The far-right government's plan, that's Netanyahu's group, to weaken the nation's judiciary. It's just embarrassing. And all they can do is scream, it's independent. You know why? Because that is the argument of why the ICC or the ICJ shouldn't be allowed to do what they're doing. That's their only way they can look. And the point is that it's not independent, meaning it's not manipulated by the power structure that can make it do what they want. Now, we talked about it in this show, which is where we'll end here, which is titled appropriately, The Illusion of the Altruistic U.S. Government Has Been Dismantled by the Ongoing Israeli Genocide. Very important to understand. Now, Anar Bertrand also highlights that while we're told the countries in the gray down here are the international community, it's actually quite the opposite. All the countries in green are the ones that respect the reality of a Palestinian state. Take a look at that and tell me who the international community truly is. And of course, that's going to offend all the people that act like it's all Muslim terrorists against, Laura Loomer style. But these are children, guys. These are not serious people. We have to recognize what's really going on here and take stock of what is changing. Now, I'm going to leave it there in just a time because I'm going to be late for my next appointment here, guys. But I really hope that this resonates. And we're going to be going through, possibly tomorrow, a very important overlap here in regard to Shawnee Luke and the lies being spun. And just quickly to tell you what I'm talking about, they're claiming these bodies were found in an UNRWA building. An UNRWA building that they right before this had been bombing. So, I wonder what the likelihood is that they might have killed them themselves or that they don't care. And the overall reality is that they've been doing this from the very beginning. So I hope we can always understand that. And I will be doing another focus on the Greater Israel Project as well. IDF spokesman literally talking about how this is what's going to happen next, that we're going to take over more area. Exactly. And here is a settler telling you that on the record, that they're going to take a lot more territory. They're going to take parts of Syria, Iraq, Iran. And we're supposed to pretend like the other people want to do that? Or, the reality that they fund groups like the Azov movement that openly say they want to do that. Or other groups like it's mind-blowing. The accusing them of that which you are guilty. It's never been more clear. And here's a great article, which I'll go over again soon, from Matt Arrett. The Greater Israel Scheme and its Global Power Play, a delusional recipe for Armageddon. It's where we are right now. So thank you for tuning in, guys. Very important discussion. We're going to continue to push on this. I think it's important that, we don't, especially right now, that we do not fall back, that we stay the course. We need to make sure this continues to be exposed, and it's much bigger than just Israel or Zionism. but it's important to see the central role that that has played. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for support for The Last American Vagabond. We continue to need your support. All the links down below if you want to continue to support us. We have our Save TLAV campaign for the upcoming lawsuits that we're dealing with and a lot of other stuff. We definitely need your support. So thank you for being here. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.